Early Saturday morning, 2 Minnesota state lawmakers were shot along with their spouses. Representative Melissa Hortman and her husband were killed, while Senator John Hoffman and his wife were critically injured. Police have released some details, but Governor Tim Walz called it a politically motivated assassination attempt. A 57-year-old suspect who posed as a police officer is now in custody after a harrowing 2-day manhunt.
My mom and I were discussing sourdough bread when this breaking news came through. And it took my brain several minutes to process that a lawmaker had been killed. And I started thinking about how escalated even my language can be about political violence and the threats of political violence. And then something like this sort of shakes me and makes me realize that while we have seen political violence, we could be entering a new chapter where it's a lot more real. And it made me just so concerned about all the reporting I'm reading about the FBI and its resources, because things like this are predictable. A lot of outlets said that this was not surprising. I found it surprising, but I understand that the intelligence is out there. People's writings on social media are out there. And I want every one of those leads to be followed. I want this to be prioritized. Our Secretary of State in Kentucky posted about how when you serve now, you think about who's going to be in every room you walk into. And now he's going to be thinking about his house in that same way. Is this a safe place for me to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's so predictable that I thought one of the most impactful pieces of reporting about sort of the TikTok of events that went on in Minnesota was when they went to John Hoffman's house. One of the police officers immediately was like, well, we need to go check on Senator Hortman. And like that, they engaged with the suspect as he was leaving her house. Like that was just his instinct. And it was correct. And I agree with you. Like I saw the reporting that described it as like not shocking, but I was shocked and appalled, even with that crazy lead in the New York Times that was like, well, Steve Scalise commented because he was shot, and then Nancy Pelosi commented because her husband was attacked, and then Josh Shapiro commented because his house was set on fire. And I'm like, oh, God, when you line them all up like that. And Gabby Giffords commented because she was shot. I understand that it has become more common, but that doesn't make it any less shocking to me. And I am persuaded by the reality that I, as a school shooting survivor, have acknowledged that violence at school has been prevented by the hardening of our security environments. So, like, I don't want to make it an either or. Public servants need more security. That's the reality. I hate it. That's the reality, because another thing that I feel passionately about is that we're too far removed from our representatives. And so surrounding them with security is not going to help that situation. And I also just don't want to lose sight of this polarization and the increased rhetoric. You know, like, there's this drive to like say, like, whose side was he on? Was he a far left activist or a far right activist? And I just want to be like, but that misses the point. Whatever side you're on. I mean, everybody's TikToking up their own tally on either side. You got Steve Scalise, you got Donald Trump on one side, you got Nancy Pelosi, you got Gabby Giffords on the other, right? Like, so we could do this tit for tat that I don't think is productive at all, because the reality is, when the rhetoric accelerates, it's not about, it's like politically persuasive to people. It's that there are people who are susceptible for any number of reasons to that heightened political rhetoric. And the rest of us might be able to just blow it off when someone says they're the enemy of America or they're fascists coming for America. But other people can't. And that makes it more dangerous for everyone. And so, like, I kind of want to hold both of those, like the pragmatic reality of their security and the more ephemeral reality of our rhetoric, side by side.
When you start tracing back to Gabby Giffords, to Steve Scalise. We have been on notice for a long time that extreme words and extreme beliefs and extreme behavior don't have clear lines around them anymore. The thing that I read about this suspect that struck me as most true was a comment from his landlord that he seemed to have given up on life.
Mm.
And that feels like it's more at the core of anything to me than any political belief. If you've given up on life in a number of respects, then sure, something like a person's stance on abortion can occupy just an outsized portion of your mind. And I don't know how to reach people who have given up on life. And I don't know what we do about the fact that so many of those people do occupy an outsized portion of their minds with national politics in particular. But that is the call to action for me here. That even though my work is devoted to news and politics, I do not let it become an outsized portion of how I see the world and my work and worth within it. I think that's what has happened to this person.
I think that's so difficult because we tell ourselves if it's important enough, then it should take up more time and energy. Right? Like if it's the future of our country, or if it's women's reproductive rights, or if it's the safety of our children inside their school environment, well, what could be more important? And how do you show that something's important? You let it occupy you. You let it occupy your every thought, your every action, because your brain's telling you you're doing something by reading about it and getting angry about it. There is a part of your brain that says, good, you're paying attention, you're doing something about this. You're taking action through this attention. I've been like having some real moments of empathy for the way in which my parents used to really frustrate me when I was younger by sort of their blasé response to things. And I would get so mad and I would think like, don't you care? Like, you're so selfish. I mean, there's like a real narrative around boomers, I think, when it comes to sort of their feeling of responsibility for the problems of the world, I guess is how I would say it. And I've just become like, the older I get, I'm like, there's just a part of me that I have a more and more of a response. Like I can feel the old response, which is if this was important, you'd be all in. You know, lock in chat, like that's how you show it's important. And then there's this growing, louder voice that says, you can't do anything about that. You just can't do anything. I don't have any control, literally at all, over our next topic, the conflict between Israel and Iran. I just don't. What am I going to do about it? And I can't tell if that's like a wise response as I get older to just really release myself from the things I cannot control, or if it's apathy, as my 16-year-old tells me it is. Like, I don't know. I don't know after being in a political environment for so long that tells you action is how you care, when it's okay to say, and when it's maybe a type of action to say, pump the brakes. Don't let this consume you.
Chad and I watched Mountainhead this weekend. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, it's a movie on HBO about 4 tech giants getting together and observing the impact their companies are having on the world. And there's this moment in it when one of them says to the other, they're out like in the snow exploring beautiful Utah. One says to the other, do you believe in other people? Like 8 billion people who are all as real as you are. And I keep thinking about that question because I think that's what I'm puzzling through as I get older as well. I do believe in 8 billion people as real as I am. And that means that, yes, I read about this representative who gave her life to trying to do better for Minnesota families and whose children are left with this horror show and who is lost forever. We named a whole lot of people who have been subjected to political violence who are still working in politics, which I think has a desensitizing effect in some ways. even though it should have a sensitizing effect, right? It should make us even more aware and understand more. And it goes the other direction because our brains do these weird things. And so when I think about Israel and Iran, my brain does that weird thing because I believe in the reality of 8 billion people who matter as much as I do, have thoughts and feelings just like I have. It is almost paralyzing to me to think about the civilian casualties and the military ones too happening in this war that seemed to spring up out of nowhere and that also is as predictable as the sun coming up in the morning. And then at the same time, because I believe in 8 billion people as real as I am, I feel such a lack of control and so hyper aware of how even if I had the exact solution or the exact answer to any of these problems, which I do not, how impossible it would be to implement that idea. And that calls me even further into sort of my immediate surroundings where I can have some influence. So I'm puzzling through the same thing that you are. I don't want to be an apathetic person. I don't want to be unaffected by these events, but I also don't want to end up like this shooter where I am so overtaken by my belief that I have answers for the world that I become a very destructive force.